Joe Rogan had been putting off getting his Tesla Model S checked for weeks. The battery warning light had been flickering intermittently, but his usual Tesla service center was booked for a month. His assistant found a small electric vehicle specialist shop in East Austin, EV Solutions, that could see him the same day. The shop was tucked between a coffee roastery and a vintage clothing store, barely noticeable except for a small sign and a few electric cars parked outside. Joe pulled up to find a modest operation. Clean, organized, but nothing fancy. No corporate branding, no flashy displays, just a workshop focused on function over form. A woman emerged from the service bay as Joe parked. She was maybe 45, average height, wearing a navy blue shop shirt and jeans. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and she moved with the confident efficiency of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "You must be Joe," she said, wiping her hands on a clean rag. "I'm Sarah. Heard you're having some battery issues." "Yeah. Warning light comes on randomly. No pattern I can figure out." Sarah nodded, already walking toward the Tesla. "Mind if I take a quick look?" Joe handed over the key fob. Sarah slid into the driver's seat and immediately began checking displays with a systematic approach that impressed Joe. She wasn't just looking at the obvious readouts. She was navigating through diagnostic menus most Tesla owners never knew existed. "When did this start?" she asked, still focused on the screen. "About 3 weeks ago. Comes and goes." Sarah got out and popped the frunk, studying the battery management system with the same methodical intensity. Something about her approach reminded Joe of the engineers he'd interviewed. Precise, analytical, but with an intuitive understanding that went beyond textbook knowledge. "Software issue, most likely," she said after several minutes. "I'll need to run a full diagnostic, but I think I know what we're dealing with." "How long?" "Give me 2 hours. There's a great coffee shop next door if you want to wait, or I can call you when it's ready." As Joe prepared to leave, he noticed something that made him pause. Sarah was already setting up diagnostic equipment with movements that seemed almost military in their precision. Every tool had its place, every step was deliberate, and her focus was absolute. "You've been working on electric vehicles long?" Joe asked. "About 8 years, Sarah replied, connecting a diagnostic cable. "Before that, I worked on different kinds of electrical systems." Something in her tone suggested there was more to that story, but Joe didn't push. He headed to the coffee shop, curious about the woman who seemed to understand his Tesla better than the Tesla technicians themselves. 2 hours later, Sarah called Joe back to the shop. His Tesla was parked outside, and she was waiting with a tablet showing detailed diagnostic results. "Found the problem," she said, showing him the screen. "Faulty sensor in the battery thermal management system. It's sending intermittent false readings to the main computer." Joe looked at the data, impressed by the thoroughness of her analysis. "How did you narrow it down so quickly?" "Process of elimination. Started with the most likely causes and worked systematically through the possibilities." Sarah wiped down the tablet screen. "The sensor itself is fine, but there's a loose connection that's causing voltage fluctuations." "Can you fix it?" "Already did. Cleaned the connection, applied conductive paste, and updated the firmware. Should be good to go." Joe was surprised. Most repair shops would have ordered a new part and charged for a full sensor replacement. "That's it?" "Sometimes the simplest solution is the right one," Sarah said. "I ran a full system check afterward. Everything's functioning within normal parameters." Joe started the Tesla and immediately noticed the warning light was gone. The battery system displayed normally, and all the readings looked stable. "What do I owe you?" $150. Covers the diagnostic time and the repair." Joe pulled out his wallet, but found himself curious about Sarah's approach to the problem. "Mind if I ask where you learned to troubleshoot electrical systems like that?" Sarah paused, just for a moment. "Military background. Army Signal Corps." That explained the systematic approach and attention to detail. Joe had interviewed enough veterans to recognize the methodical problem-solving style that military training instilled. "What kind of work did you do?" "Communications systems, mostly. Field maintenance and repair under challenging conditions." The way she said "challenging conditions" suggested there was more to the story, but Sarah's body language indicated she wasn't interested in elaborating. Joe paid and thanked her, but as he prepared to leave, he noticed something on Sarah's workbench that caught his attention. Among the usual automotive tools was a piece of equipment he didn't recognize, something that looked more sophisticated than typical car repair gear. "That's interesting equipment," he said, nodding toward the workbench. Sarah followed his gaze and quickly moved to block his view. Just some specialized diagnostic tools. But Joe had seen enough. The device looked military-grade, and Sarah's reaction suggested it wasn't standard automotive equipment. As he drove away, Joe found himself thinking about Sarah's precise movements, her systematic approach to problem-solving, and her reluctance to discuss her military background. Something told him there was much more to her story than fixing electric cars in East Austin. Over the following weeks, Joe found reasons to return to Sarah's shop. First, it was a software update he claimed to need. Then, a strange noise he wanted checked. Each visit revealed more about Sarah's exceptional technical abilities. "You know," Joe said during his third visit, "I've never met anyone who understands electrical systems the way you do. It's like you can see problems other people miss." Sarah looked up from the diagnostic computer. "Experience, mostly. You learn to recognize patterns." "What kind of patterns?" "Electrical systems all work on the same basic principles, whether it's a car, a computer, or—" She paused. "Other equipment." Joe noticed the hesitation. "Other equipment?" Sarah's hands stilled on the keyboard. She looked at Joe directly. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who just needs his car fixed." "Force of habit. I interview people for a living. I'm curious about stories, especially when someone clearly has an interesting one." Sarah considered this. "What kind of interviews?" "Podcast. Long-form conversations with people who've done interesting things." "I've heard of you," Sarah said. "Joe Rogan Experience. That's me. And something tells me you've done more than just fix communication systems in the Army." Sarah saved her work and turned to face Joe completely. "What makes you think that?" "The way you approach problems. The equipment you use. The fact that you can diagnose complex electrical issues in minutes when other technicians take hours." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing whether to trust Joe with more information. "Army Signal Corps doesn't tell the whole story," she said finally. "What's the whole story?" "I was attached to Special Operations Units, Communications and Electronic Warfare Specialist." Joe felt recognition. Electronic warfare was serious business, the kind requiring security clearances and classified operations. "Iraq? Afghanistan?" "Both. Plus some places that aren't on official deployment records." The weight of that statement hung between them. Sarah was talking about black operations, missions that didn't officially exist. What did electronic warfare involve? Sarah looked around the shop, making sure they were alone. Jamming enemy communications, intercepting signals, sometimes disabling electronic devices remotely. Disabling devices? IEDs, mostly. When you can't get close enough to defuse them manually, sometimes you can disable them electronically. Joe realized he was talking to someone who had literally saved lives by understanding electrical systems at a level most people couldn't imagine. "Is that why you're so good with car electronics?" "Same principles. Everything electronic has vulnerabilities if you know how to find them." The conversation about electronic warfare marked a shift in Joe and Sarah's relationship. Over the next few visits, Sarah began sharing details about her military service that she'd clearly never discussed with others. "The thing people don't understand about electronic warfare," Sarah said while updating software on Joe's Tesla, "is that it's not just about jamming radios. It's about understanding how every electronic system can be exploited." "What do you mean?" "Take an IED. They're triggered by cell phones, garage door openers, sometimes car key fobs." Sarah connected a diagnostic cable. "If you understand the frequency they're using, you can jam the signal or send a false trigger at a safe distance." Joe watched her work, noting how her hands moved with absolute precision. "How many times did you do that?" "Disable IEDs remotely? Hundreds, maybe more." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact. "Every convoy route had to be swept electronically before vehicles could pass. We'd drive ahead with jamming equipment, looking for electronic signatures." That must have been dangerous work. Everything over there was dangerous. But electronic warfare felt different. You're fighting an enemy you can't see, using weapons that don't make noise. Joe could see the weight of those memories in Sarah's expression. Did you ever lose anyone? Sarah's hand stilled on the diagnostic equipment. My team? Number but the convoys we were protecting. She trailed off. There were times when our jamming failed, or when the enemy switched frequencies faster than we could adapt. You couldn't save everyone. Number. And that's what stays with you. Every electronic device that got through, every bomb that detonated despite our best efforts, those weren't just tactical failures. Those were people. Joe understood the burden Sarah was describing. It was similar to what he'd heard from other veterans who'd carried responsibility for others' lives. Is that why you left the military? Partly. But also because the technology was evolving faster than our ability to counter it. IEDs were getting more sophisticated, using frequencies we couldn't jam. Sarah disconnected the diagnostic cable and handed Joe his keys. I realized I was fighting a losing battle. Every countermeasure we developed, they found a way around. So, you came back and started fixing cars? Started fixing things I could actually fix, Sarah corrected. In the military, I was always reacting to threats. Here, I can solve problems completely. Joe could see the appeal. After years of incomplete victories and constant threats, working on civilian electronics must feel refreshingly straightforward. Do you miss it, the challenge of electronic warfare? I miss the team. I miss feeling like the work mattered on a larger scale. Sarah looked around her small shop. But I don't miss the pressure of knowing that a mistake could cost lives. 3 weeks into their growing friendship, Sarah invited Joe to see something she'd never shown another civilian. She led him to a locked room behind her main workshop, a space filled with equipment that definitely wasn't for fixing cars. This is where I do my real work, Sarah said, unlocking the door. Joe stepped inside and immediately understood why Sarah had been secretive. The room contained sophisticated electronic equipment, signal analyzers, frequency generators, and devices that looked distinctly military-grade. What is all this? I consult for the government occasionally. Counter-terrorism work, mostly. They send me suspicious electronic devices to analyze. Sarah moved to a workbench where a disassembled cell phone lay in organized pieces. This came from a raid in Dallas last month, suspected of being modified for remote detonation. Joe studied the device, noting how methodically Sarah had taken it apart. And definitely modified. See this circuit board? Someone added a relay that could trigger an external device when the phone receives a specific text message. The implications were chilling. Joe was looking at what could have been a bomb trigger, now rendered harmless by Sarah's expertise. How often do you get these requests? Few times a month. FBI, ATF, sometimes local police when they encounter electronic devices they don't understand. Sarah moved to another workbench where a laptop sat partially disassembled. This one's interesting. Suspected cyber warfare tool. Someone modified the wireless card to do things it wasn't designed for. Like what? Hack into networks, jam wireless signals, possibly intercept communications. Sarah pointed to tiny components soldered onto the main board. These modifications are sophisticated, military-grade work. Joe realized he was looking at the civilian continuation of Sarah's military service. She hadn't really left electronic warfare behind. She'd just shifted to domestic threats. Do you ever worry about bringing this kind of work home? You mean security? Sarah gestured around the room. This place is more secure than most government facilities. Faraday cage built into the walls, encrypted communications. I meant emotionally. You're still dealing with people trying to hurt others. Sarah was quiet for a moment. The difference is control. In Iraq and Afghanistan, I was always reacting to threats I couldn't predict. Here, I'm analyzing devices after they've been captured. Have you prevented attacks? Several. The phone trigger I showed you? That was part of a larger plot. My analysis helped identify the network behind it. Sarah locked the room and led Joe back to the main shop. Most people see me as just a mechanic who fixes electric cars. But this is what I really do. This is how I'm still serving. Seeing Sarah's secret government work changed Joe's understanding of her completely. She wasn't just a veteran who'd transitioned to civilian life. She was still actively protecting people. "Sarah," Joe said during his next visit, "what you showed me. That's incredible work you're doing." Sarah looked up from the electric motorcycle she was servicing. "It's just consulting. You're literally preventing terrorist attacks." "Maybe. It's hard to know the impact individual analysis has on larger investigations." Joe could see Sarah was downplaying her work, probably from years in classified environments. "Have you thought about sharing your story? Not classified details, but how military skills translate to protecting civilians?" Sarah's expression grew cautious. "What do you mean?" "People need to understand that veterans like you are still serving. The transition doesn't have to mean the end of meaningful work. I can't talk about specific cases. I'm not asking you to. But the general concept, using electronic warfare skills to analyze terrorist devices, that's something people should know." Sarah considered this while working. What would be the point? To show that military training has value beyond the battlefield, to help other veterans see their skills matter in civilian contexts. Sarah nodded slowly. "I've met other veterans who struggle to find purpose after service. They feel like their military skills don't translate. But yours obviously do. Because I was lucky to find work that uses my training. Most veterans aren't that fortunate." Joe saw an opportunity. What if we could help change that? By connecting veterans with organizations that need their skills. "You think there's demand for electronic warfare specialists?" "I think there's demand for people who solve complex problems under pressure and understand technology deeply." Sarah seemed to consider this seriously. "There are other veterans from my unit who've struggled with transition. Good people with valuable skills who feel lost. What if we could help them find their way?" Sarah finished her work. "There's a veteran networking group that meets monthly. Electronic warfare specialists, signals intelligence people, cyber warfare veterans. That sounds like exactly the community that could help. Most struggle to find meaningful work. They end up in IT jobs that don't use half their capabilities." Joe could see Sarah's frustration for her fellow veterans. Would they be open to exploring other options? Probably. If they thought there were real opportunities. For the first time since Joe had known her, Sarah seemed excited about helping others find the same purpose she'd discovered. 2 months later, Joe received a text from Sarah. "Meeting with the veteran group tonight. Thanks for pushing me to reach out." Joe smiled reading it. He'd connected Sarah with contacts in cybersecurity and defense contracting. But more importantly, he'd encouraged her to engage with fellow veterans. The following week, Sarah called with excitement he'd never heard before. "You're not going to believe what happened," she said. "Tell me." "I met with 5 other electronic warfare veterans. All brilliant, all underemployed. 2 working basic IT support, 1 driving rideshare, 2 unemployed." Joe could hear the passion in Sarah's voice. "What did you propose?" "A consulting cooperative. All of us working together to provide electronic analysis services to law enforcement and security companies." "That's brilliant. How did they respond?" "They're excited. For the first time since leaving the military, they see a way to use their real skills." Joe felt satisfaction hearing Sarah's enthusiasm. What would the cooperative look like? "We'd pool our expertise. Between the 6 of us, we have experience with signals intelligence, electronic warfare, cyber defense, and communications security. We could handle cases requiring multiple specialties." "And there's demand for that?" "More than I realized. Since word got out about my consulting, I've been getting requests I can't handle alone. Federal agencies, state police, private security, they all need people who understand sophisticated electronic threats." Sarah continued. "The best part is working together again. That team dynamic, shared understanding. It's what most of us miss about military service." Joe could hear how important that aspect was. "When do you start?" "We're meeting next week to formalize the partnership. Everyone's bringing examples of cases they've worked individually. This is exactly what I hoped would happen when we first talked about helping other veterans. It's more than that, Joe. It's giving all of us back our sense of purpose. We're not just veterans trying to fit into civilian jobs anymore. We're specialists providing services that genuinely matter. Sarah paused. There's something else. We want to create a training program for other electronic warfare veterans. Teach them how to transition their skills to civilian consulting. Joe was impressed by the scope of Sarah's vision. You're not just helping yourselves. You're building a pathway for others. Exactly. Every electronic warfare specialist who leaves the military should know they have options beyond basic IT work. As Joe ended the call, he reflected on how a simple car repair had evolved into something much larger. Sarah hadn't just found her own path. She was creating opportunities for an entire community of veterans. 6 months later, Joe returned to EV Solutions to find the shop transformed. Sarah's one-person operation now housed a thriving cooperative called Signal 6 Consulting. "Joe," Sarah called out with confidence he'd never seen before. "Perfect timing. Want you to meet the team." She led him to where 2 veterans were working. This is Marcus, former Signals Intelligence, and Lisa, who did cyber warfare for the Air Force. Both looked up and nodded. Joe could see the same focused intensity he'd come to associate with Sarah. "And this is David," Sarah said, leading Joe to the 3rd workstation. Electronic warfare specialist who focused on counter-drone technology. David was analyzing a modified drone. "Law enforcement case," he explained. "Someone's been using these to smuggle drugs across the border." Joe was impressed by the sophistication. "How's business?" "Better than we imagined," Sarah replied. "We've got contracts with 3 federal agencies, 2 state police departments, and several private security firms." Sarah showed Joe a training area where 2 more veterans were learning electronic analysis techniques. "That's the training program I mentioned. We bring in electronic warfare veterans and teach them civilian consulting applications." "How many have you trained?" 12 so far. All are now working either with us or with other security firms. Joe could see the pride in Sarah's voice. She'd built a successful business and created a pathway for other veterans. "There's something else," Sarah said, leading Joe to a corner where a memorial display showed military photos alongside a plaque reading, "In honor of those who served in silent wars." "We wanted to remember teammates who didn't make it home," Sarah explained. "Electronic warfare units had casualties too, but often didn't get recognition because our work was classified." Joe understood the memorial's importance. It represented continuation of service in a different form. "Sarah, what you've built here is incredible. You've taken your military experience and created something that serves both veterans and civilians. It's what you said that first day. Military skills don't stop being valuable just because you leave the service." As Joe prepared to leave, Sarah handed him a business card for Signal 6 Consulting. "No charge for the Tesla work," she said. "You gave us something worth more than money. You helped us remember that our service doesn't end when we take off the uniform." Driving away, Joe reflected on how a simple battery warning had led to discovering skilled veterans who just needed the right opportunity to continue serving. Signal 6. Consulting had become proof that transition from military to civilian life didn't mean the end of meaningful work. Sometimes it just meant finding a different battlefield. The end.